Hi BookTube, and welcome to the first video of 2020. So this is going to be a sort of buddy read stroke announcement video for the upcoming plans I have for at least the first half of the year. So I'm going to start with the buddy reads, and I'm currently started on New Year's Day buddy reading this with husband and wife Kelly and Jason. That's Kelly at Books I'm Not Reading and Jason at Old Blues Chapter and Verse. Jason and I started a new tradition last year that we would start the new year with a buddy read. Last year we read Overton by Adam Thorpe. This was the choice for this year. In the Lake of the Woods by Tim O'Brien. Now, I've read and loved Tim O'Brien's novel The Things They Carried, and I always had it in my head that's pretty much all he was known for, but actually this is his second book of his that I've read, and no, there's a lot more to his bow. So we've only just started the buddy read. We've had our first interaction across Voxer, and Kelly remarked that it's odd having to Vox with your husband who you live with in the same house, which is very true. So that is ongoing through January. Then I have a buddy read in May with Celia of the channel Celia. This is George Perec, Life a User's Manual. Now last year Celia and I had a couple of buddy reads, but one that's particularly successful was Clarice Lispector's The Passion According to GH, which made it to number 2 in my top 10 reads of 2019. So Celia, I'm hoping we have similar good fortune with this. I've read Perec's A Void and been told that this is better, so high hopes for that. And finally, before I get on to something that goes throughout the year, this is an announcement video that, led by Alan over at Big Hard Books and Classics, with a little help from my friend Mr. James Joyce himself, that we are doing a buddy read, or a stroke read along, never really understand the difference between those, of James Joyce's Ulysses. Alan has read it many times. This will be my first time. I've always sort of been what's the word? Intimidated by it, but with Alan to hold my hand, hopefully that will make the path through it a bit easier. We've just completed a buddy read of Dante's Inferno, and that went very well. I haven't yet posted my video, but I will do at some point. So we are doing this over February, March, April. Yeah, that's right, over 3 months. Joyce, to read your difficult book. And we are doing 6 sections or 6 chapters per month. So 6 in February, 6 in March, 6 in April. I don't know if I do sort of reaction videos or as I'm reading along. I do tend to make my videos once I've finished a book. We'll see how this goes. We'll see how I cope with it. You know, Alan for Dante's Inferno did a sort of canto by canto sort of analysis, but you know, that takes a lot of work, so you know, I don't know exactly how I'm going to approach this from a BookTube point of view. I know I'm going to approach it reading, as I say, 6 sections a month, but I know there are some other people who have sort of notionally signed along. They're going to join in the read along. I don't know who they are, because sort of Alan's sort of leading on this, but you know, the more the merrier. Anyone else who wants to join, either contact me or Alan. We communicate over Voxer. It's easy enough to sign up to that if you haven't got it. So really looking forward to that. You know, it's about, you know, I'm 55, I will be 56 before starting this. It's about time in my life, as someone who putatively sort of refers to himself as a person of letters in the sense that I write. I really should have read this by then. So, Joyce, here's to happy reading of your book. Oh, look, there you are. Oh, you're wearing an eye patch. Yeah, I don't like that cover at all. It's quite disturbing, because Joyce has got one eye, but he did have very bad eyesight. But 2 eyes there. Okay, and finally on to a project that's going throughout the year, which was started by Mel's Bookland Adventures, and I think Britta Bowler as well, I think both of them, who are both German, and they are trying to encourage the reading of more literature that appeared in German, the German language originally before being translated. And I've always had a hankering after German literature. I've read everything by Kafka. One of the people I'm proposing to read this year is very, very formative in my own writing, and I'll talk about that when we get to their book. Last year I read 3 Stefan Zweig novels. Number 5 in my top 10 book reads of last year was a book of concrete poetry by the Austrian writer Bernhard. So I have always, not only have I always read German literature off and on, but it's one of my greatest regrets in life that I didn't learn German at school. I learned Latin instead at the suggestion of my father, which I rather regret now, because obviously German and English are quite related, but the German language does certain things that I wish we had in English. The notion of compound words. So if to express quite sort of philosophical or difficult constructs, if the word doesn't exist in your language, German is able to compose words that give you an insight into that, and I wish we had that in English, which we don't. I once wrote a flash fiction story playing on that. And just things like, the fact that all nouns are effectively proper nouns in German. They all have capital letters and things like that. Because I've always hankered after writing a story, half in English, half in German. But sadly, I won't be able to do that because, I'm not going to be able to assimilate a new language age 55, and certainly not up to the level of being able to write in it competently, let alone at the sort of level of literature that I aspire to. So I do have quite a already pre-established relationship with German, but what I haven't read really is much contemporary German authors. I did read Insane by, I think his name was Goetze, because it's published by Fitzcarraldo a couple of years ago. But other than that, I'm not really aware of much contemporary German fiction. And you'll see in my picks for the year that these are all sort of modern classics rather than contemporary fiction. So the idea is that you commit to reading a certain level of books going up, so the first 1 to 5, then I assume 6 to 10 or whatever, and I'm going to sort of flirt with the border between 1 to 5 and 6 to 10, and they all have different names. I will post the link to the announcement video by Mel, and there's also a Goodreads group, and I will post the link to that, and you can find out the different levels. So the first book on my intended list, and I'll be reading this hopefully in January, that's the plan, Ingeborg Bachmann, Malina. I'm very excited by this because it's supposed to be sort of quite, you read the blurb and it's sort of, this is just a sort of, relationships book, which I must admit never really interests me, but apparently this is actually quite subversive of that. And it's, the New York Times reckons, an intense, courageous novel equal to the best of Virginia Woolf and Samuel Beckett. Well, I'm a huge Beckett fan, so if it's anywhere sort of halfway towards that, I think I'm going to really enjoy this. And when I mentioned in my TBR that I was going to read this, a commenter said, oh, she was married to Max Frisch. So I know nothing about Max Frisch, to the extent I actually thought he was an artist and not an author. So if my sort of reading German literature goes particularly well, then I might track down some Max, and I like this, I might track down some Max Frisch. The second on my list is The Seventh Cross by Anna Seghers, which is recommended by Sean the Book Maniac. It's the story of what it was actually like to live in Germany under the Nazis, not in the camps, but in Germany itself. So I'm looking forward to that. Sean, one of his top reads of last year. Then we have W.G. Sebald, The Rings of Saturn. I've also got Austerlitz because I knew Austerlitz was originally written in German. I wasn't sure, because I think it's quite English in its way, The Rings of Saturn, that this was written in German, but this has been translated by Michael Hulse. So, is that the same translator? Maybe Austerlitz was written in English. Who knows? Oh no, translation. Anthea Bell. Now Anthea Bell is who I think is either died recently or was at least very venerable. She was one of Kafka's translators, so that augurs well to this. I would prefer to read The Rings of Saturn because, as I say, I think it's a bit more way out there than Austerlitz, which I think is possibly more conventional. Maybe I'm doing a disservice to it, but who knows? I might get to read both. Thomas Bernhard, correction. So last year I read my first Thomas Bernhard called Concrete, and I didn't know what to make of it really. And I thought that was going to be I was going to leave Bernhard, but I got to a below the line discussion with people who are obviously Bernhard fans, and they sort of persuaded me, I think, through their enthusiasm to try another one of his books, even though he seems to come across someone who writes the same thing over and over again. So I'm going to be interested to see how I get on with Thomas Bernhard correction. I guess it will make or break Bernhard for me. He was Austrian. And, oh yes, another one of my finger pals, Bertolt Brecht. This is a book of collected short stories, although I might also read, I don't have this, I might purchase it, his book, the Threepenny novel. So I know Brecht from theatre. I've either read or seen a lot of his plays, so The Irresistible Rise of Arturo Wee, Mother Courage, The Caucasian Chalk Circle, what else? I've read his play Baal. I've never seen it. That's one of his first works. I've missed one out, one of his other famous ones. The Threepenny Opera, obviously. So I've seen or read all of those, and I'm a big fan, and he's very, very influential on me, and I'll come back to that. So I'm interested, you know, I've never read any of his prose, so I will either read this, the collected short stories, or as I say, the Threepenny novel, because apparently that's quite different to the Threepenny opera, although the main characters seem to be the same. And you know, from the blurb I've read, it's a sort of a Marxist critique of capitalism, which I suppose the Threepenny opera was, to some extent. Now, in this day and age, it's going to be kind of interesting to see whether that still holds up, both in the sense of its Marxist critique, since, you know, the world of capitalism has moved on somewhat since then. But also, you know, I know my Marx, I studied Marx at university. Bringing it to literature poses some problems. Does any sort of preordained sort of body of theory that you might want to include in a novel can be quite tricky. Sometimes it's just sort of, you know, ladled on at the expense of the artistry and the literariness. So, well, you know, if I get to that, we'll see whether I think that he achieves that. So, Mr. Brecht, first of all, thank you. That's all right. I owe you a lot in my work, because what Brecht did that I took as very influential is, in sort of a classical theatre, the sort of proscenium arch theatre, you had obviously the three sides of the stage and the two wings where the action took place. And then the audience was seated facing that. And Brecht sort of talked about the invisible fourth wall, that the audience were in a privileged position of looking inside the house or the whatever building the action was taking place, was where it was set. And that wall is invisible, giving the audience sort of access to being able to sort of watch what was going on, almost in a voyeuristic way. But we were very much outside. We were not part of the action in any way. We were, as I say, almost like voyeurs. Brecht wanted to break down that notion of the invisible fourth wall. So he had a lot of sort of what he called alienation techniques, which are to break down the sort of the notion of distance between action on stage and the audience, so that his actors would often come out of character and make it very clear that they were actors playing a part. The use of songs also to say, you know, this isn't drama as you know, sort of as we know it from you know, sitting room drama or kitchen sink drama. I know they're anachronistic to Brecht, but you know, he's saying no, this is about the relationship of audience and actors and their interaction. And Brecht did it because he wanted to get over his Marxist agenda. But I found that very influential in the world of writing prose, because I too want to break. There isn't a literal fourth wall between a reader and the action of the page, but I want to break down that sense of the reader is outside, is kept at arm's length, has to suspend belief in order to enter the world of the book, which is very much what Brecht was breaking down. I'm not interested in that as a writer. I very much want to remind the reader that this is a work of fiction. This is a work of the imagination. At no point does this have any bearing with reality, except what is the nature of the relationship between reality and fiction. And given how much sort of consensus and world building there is in what we take for reality, a lot of myths, a lot of things taken for granted as true or as knowledge, which we base whole knowledge systems, that's what I want to sort of query, and I look to Brecht's technique for doing that. So, Bertolt Brecht, very, very significant to me, as is a bonus book. So this is a collection of lyrics by Blixa Bargeld, who's the lead singer and guitarist in a German industrial band called Einstürzende Neubauten, which means new buildings collapse or new buildings fall down. And he's a fantastic lyricist. He very much, within any song, is moving between three scales: the human scale, but also the cosmic scale, planetary scale, and also the microscopic scale of bacteria and viruses and DNA. And in that sense, I found it very, very influential on me, because that's kind of how I like to sort of try and move through my imagery. You know, you're always messing about with scale. It's not always on a human scale, or if it's a human scale, it's reaching out to the DNA microscopic scale of us, and also the aspirational, our place in the cosmos kind of thing. So I have read this before. I have all the songs, but I feel it's time for a reread, really, because I haven't read this in a while. And if Britta and Mel will forgive me, because I've never studied German, so I have no accent, I just want to read this as an example of, you know, why I think he's such a sort of impressive and interesting writer. So this is called Thirsty Animal in English, which is, I think, Durstiges Tier in German. I would say that each of the songs is produced in the German and in the English. And if memory serves, this is one of their early songs. And Blixa was lying down and had his ribcage mic'd up because the band were playing his ribcage with drumsticks. That was the musical accompaniment to this song. So, I mean, he literally not bled for his art, but got bruised for his art. So, I'm going to read this in very bad German. Read as seen, because as I say, I've never studied it, and then I'll give the English translation. It's very short. Kriechend in Elend, nicht ist hier, trage Zellen und Lammung, durchstiges Tier, dein Zellen sprechen, ho auf Rohr, denkst in Symbolen, durchstiges Tier, Lava bricht aus, der Zellkern bricht auf, neu in Zaun, verendest nach dem Brand, durchstiges Tier. Crawling in distress, nothing's here, indolent cells and paralysis, thirsty creature, your cells utter, here revolt, here revolt. You think in symbols, thirsty creature, lava breaks out, the cell core breaks up, new islands, you perish after the blaze, thirsty creature. So, Blixa Bargeld, so I look forward to rereading that. As I say, it's been quite a while. I mean, I do listen to his music all the time, but they're all sung in German, or at least, you know, until latterly they're all sung in German. So I don't really know what they mean. I need to refresh my memory as to what they mean. And finally, one that I don't have to hand. I've always sort of been told that the poetry of Rainer Maria Rilke is some of the best poetry around. And somewhere in my shed, I have a copy of his poems, again, like the Bargeld book, sort of one page German, one page English. So Lukács and Totally Pretentious and I are sort of moving towards each other as to whether we buddy read Rilke as part of this Reading German in 2020. So hopefully we could do that, because I've never done a buddy read with Lukács, and I do have to say, having just watched he happens to have read Ulysses recently for the first time, and he did a brilliant take on it, approaching it as a neophyte, somebody who's never read it before, which is a position I find myself in, and his reactions and how he approached it in terms of what support of other texts did he feel he needed, and in what way to use that. I'm going to post a link to that video because I think it's outstanding. So on the basis, I mean, you know, I love Lukács's channel anyway, but on the basis of that, if we are able to do a buddy read together, that, you know, I think we're going to, for me, I'm going to get an awful lot out of it. So there you have it. So just a very, very quick refresh. Current buddy read with Jason and Kelly. May buddy read with Celia, Life of Users Manual. 3-month read-along stroke buddy read led by Alan over at Big Hard Books and Classics, Joyce's Ulysses, and then all these various books. Oh God, too thick to span in one. For reading German literature in 2020, ably supported by two of my friends, Mr. James Joyce and her Bertolt Brecht. Okay, so here's to a good 2020 in reading. Thanks very much.